Star Wars is built around tales of the light side and the dark side, but what if a new era of Force users abandon all traditional Force philosophies as a response to the historical failures of the Jedi and Sith? I've been thinking about a concept for a future Star Wars where we make some serious changes to the Jedi and the Sith. This outlook for an alternate timeline for the future of Star Wars might not be far away from a possibility, but is it a good idea or a bad idea? Well, that's something we're going to touch upon by the end of this video. So what is that I'm actually talking about? One of my propositions for a new era in the timeline would be a period when the Jedi and Sith have been replaced by another group of Force wielders or Force beings in the galaxy. This means in essence that the Jedi and Sith would be no more. They would be gone and eradicated from the galaxy one way or another, if it's through a massive war or that people just generally stopped believing in them until they eventually died out, or they escaped far into the galaxy where no one would ever find them again. I think this new era of Force wielders would be intrigued by new philosophies about the Force and what the Force really means in this universe. Because for a long period of time, the Jedi and Sith have had pretty strict principles about what it means to be tied to the light side of the Force or the dark side of the Force. The light and the dark side of the Force have certainly been huge foundations for how to view the Force, and those perspectives naturally attract either the Jedi or the Sith. Now, obviously, there are some gray zones in here where other people and more independent people divert from the norms of the Jedi and the Sith and make their own little cult or their own little group of Force wielders that some people in the community would argue be called Grey Jedi or something else. But if you look at the possibility that we could see an era of Star Wars later down the line that would basically be all about Force wielders that's not related to the light and dark side of the Force, could we see new powers and a new understanding of the Force and what it really means? Or do the Jedi and Sith with their light side and dark side already have figured out everything there is to know about the Force? In my opinion, I highly doubt that, because the Force is basically everywhere and all around us, and even though the Jedi and Sith have been studying the Force for thousands of years, I doubt that they know everything about it. Especially for the Jedi, who are not as daring when it comes to delving into the aspects of the Force, where the Sith might take a little bit more risks to understand what the Force is capable of providing whoever wields the Force. I think a new era where we have Force wielders that have disassociated themselves from the Jedi and the Sith and the light side and the dark side entirely would be incredibly interesting. If you look at current canon, for example, like Baylan's Skull, he is not exactly a Jedi, nor is he a Sith. He's kind of in between, because he believes that the philosophies of the Jedi and the Sith are flawed. Now, obviously, what is very obvious is that he leans more to the dark side of the Force and its powers more than the light side, but that's really because he wants to achieve his goals, which are that he wants to go beyond the limitations of the Jedi and the Sith. So imagine characters like Baylan's Skull just duplicated into thousands of people across the galaxy, or at least under one form of banner, then I think the state of the galaxy would be incredibly different, and the way we look at Star Wars just in general would be very different. So imagine this: instead of the group of Force wielders saying that they rely on the dark side or the light side, they could say that they simply rely on the Force itself. The Force is what provides them the power. Beyond that, they don't narrow themselves to a side like the Jedi and the Sith do. They are simply bound to the Force and the Force alone. That's it, that's all that matters, and nothing else. Personally, I just love this idea. I love this idea of having the Jedi and the Sith and the light side and the dark side be completely removed from the timeline of Star Wars for a period of time at least, where they aren't the focus. The focus is just the Force and what the Force really means. Like Obi-Wan says, the Force is everything. It's all around us and it penetrates us, and it basically binds the universe together. So if the Force is everything, then it's one thing, which means we don't really have to split it up into two factions like the light side or the dark side. These new Force wielders can simply consider it as one thing. The Force is the path to follow. Now, with that said, even though I really love this idea, and I think it's a really interesting idea, is it a good path to follow, or would it begin to break down the foundations of the franchise? So almost everything around Star Wars is built upon the foundation of the Jedi and Sith and the light side versus the dark side. So if we remove that entirely, I don't think it would be Star Wars anymore. Star Wars have been kind of follow a sort of fundamental black and white structure when it comes to the light side and the dark side, or you could say the good side and the bad side, or the hero side or the villain side. These clear differences of good and evil is kind of what Star Wars was built upon in the first place. This universe relies heavily on that contrast between these two sides. And almost everything we see in Star Wars, from Star Wars Legends and Star Wars canon, when you start breaking things down, it almost always falls back to these two differences. The good side and the bad side, or again, the hero side or the villain side. So I don't think it would be a wise idea for Star Wars to move into this direction for a future era, at least not in this scale. Instead, they could focus more on individual characters, again like Bail and Skull, where they have this philosophy that the Force is one and that the light side and the dark side are kind of pointless to focus on. But an entire new era of multiple people carrying this philosophy, to the point where the Jedi and the Sith are literally eradicated completely from the galaxy, I think that would be a bit too much. So, with all that said, never forget, the Force is with you.